I couldn't do it. My mouth said the vows, but my heart was miles away in a small cottage on the edge of the woods. Sophia, please be there.
My lord? You should be at the altar. You're shivering.
I left her. I left it all behind. Look at my hands, Sophia. You're the only one who can read them. Tell me, do they look like they belong to a man who is lying? I couldn't marry her. It would have been a life of silence and lies. I want the truth. I want you. Sophia, will you marry me?
Your hands never lied to me, William. And right now they are telling me exactly what I've been praying to hear.
A young woman named Sophia lived in a tiny cottage on the edge of Lord Harrington's estate. She had a rare gift. She could read people's emotions by watching how they moved their hands. No one knew her secret. The gift was not magic. Sophia would have been the first to say so. She did not believe in magic, did not believe in fortune-telling or crystal gazing or any of the superstitious arts that country people sometimes credited her with. What she had was attention, an extraordinary, almost preternatural capacity for attention that she had possessed since childhood and that had been shaped by years of practice and solitude into something that looked like a sixth sense, but was, in reality, simply the fifth sense, sight, operating at a level of refinement that most people never achieve because most people never look closely enough. She had discovered the gift when she was 7 years old, sitting in the village church in Ashbourne, watching the vicar deliver his Sunday sermon. The vicar was a kind man, a good man, beloved by his congregation, and his sermons were warm and reassuring and full of the gentle certainties that country vicars specialized in. God is love, suffering has purpose, the meek shall inherit. But Sophia, who was 7 and bored and had already memorized the sermon's content from the 3 previous Sundays when the vicar had delivered essentially the same one, was not listening to the words. She was watching his hands. The vicar's hands told a different story than his mouth. His mouth said everything is fine. His hands said I am afraid. The fingers tightened on the edges of the pulpit when he spoke about faith. Not the relaxed grip of a man holding something for support, but the white-knuckled clench of a man holding on for dear life. His right hand trembled, almost imperceptibly, when he spoke about God's plan. The tremor of a man who was not certain there was a plan. His left hand kept reaching for his pocket, where Sophia knew he kept a letter from his brother, who was ill, and the reaching was unconscious and desperate. The gesture of a man seeking comfort from a piece of paper, because the theology he was preaching was not providing it. Sophia did not know, at 7, that what she was seeing was unusual. She assumed everyone saw it. She assumed everyone noticed the way a person's hands betrayed the things their face was trained to conceal. The tightening that meant anger, the loosening that meant relief, the particular flutter of fingers that meant a lie was being told, the stillness that meant a truth was being suppressed. She assumed this was simply how people worked, that the body had 2 languages, one spoken by the mouth and one spoken by the hands, and that the hand language was the honest one. She learned, gradually, that she was wrong. Other people did not see what she saw. Other people looked at faces and listened to words and accepted both at face value, and the idea that the hands might be saying something different, something truer, something the speaker could not control, was foreign to them. Sophia mentioned it once to her mother, and her mother had looked at her with the particular expression of a parent who suspects their child might be unusual in a way that will cause problems. "Don't tell people that, love," her mother had said. "They'll think you're strange." So Sophia did not tell people. She kept the gift. if you could call it a gift, though it often felt more like a burden, to herself. She watched, she noticed, she read the language of hands in silence, and she carried the knowledge like a stone in her pocket, heavy and private, and always there. Her mother died when Sophia was 12. Consumption. The slow, grinding, merciless disease that took so many in the countryside, where the air was clean, but the medicine was scarce, and the physicians were far away and expensive. Sophia's father, a tenant farmer on the Harrington estate, a quiet man who expressed his love through labour rather than language, had been dead since Sophia was 4, killed by a falling tree during a storm, and with her mother's death, Sophia was alone. Not entirely alone. The village helped. Country villages in the Regency era operated on a system of mutual aid that was not charity, but survival. Families looked after each other's children, shared food during lean times, provided the collective parenting that individual families could not always manage. Old Mrs. Blackwell, the village herbalist, took a particular interest in Sophia. She taught her about plants, which roots reduced fever, which leaves eased pain, which berries were poisonous, and which were merely unpleasant. She taught her about the body, not the formal anatomy that physicians learned in Edinburgh and London, but the practical, hands-on knowledge of a woman who had been treating the ailments of a country village for 40 years, and who knew, from experience, that most illnesses could be managed with patience, observation, and the right combination of herbs. Sophia absorbed this knowledge the way she absorbed everything, through attention. She watched Mrs. Blackwell's hands as the old woman prepared her remedies, and she learned not just the recipes, but the technique, the precise pressure required to grind a root to powder, the exact temperature at which a poultice should be applied, the particular rhythm of mixing that produced a smooth ointment rather than a lumpy one. She learned with her eyes and her hands, and the learning was so natural, so seamless, that Mrs. Blackwell told her one afternoon over a cup of rosehip tea that she had the gift. "Not the gift your mother worried about," Mrs. Blackwell said, because she knew about the hand reading. She was the only person Sophia had ever told, and she had received the information with the calm acceptance of a woman who had seen too much of the world to be surprised by anything. The gift of healing. The gift of paying attention to what the body is telling you. Most physicians don't have it. They learn their medicine from books. You learn yours from watching. And watching, my girl, is the better teacher. By the time she was 20, Sophia was the village healer. Not officially. There was no official position, no title, no certificate. She was simply the person you went to when someone was ill and you could not afford a physician or did not trust one. She set broken bones. She treated fevers. She delivered babies. She mixed poultices and brewed teas and sat by bedsides through long nights. And the payment she received, eggs, bread, a repaired fence, a load of firewood, was not a fee, but a thank you, and the distinction mattered to her. She lived in a tiny cottage on the edge of the estate. The cottage had belonged to her parents, and the tenancy had been continued by the estate manager as a matter of administrative convenience rather than generosity. It was small, 2 rooms, a hearth, a garden, where Sophia grew the herbs she used in her remedies. It was clean. It was warm. It was, by any objective measure, modest. But it was hers, and Sophia, who had learned from a lifetime of observation that most people's unhappiness came from wanting things they did not have, had decided early on to want only what she had. She was happy. Not the dramatic, ecstatic happiness of novels and ballads, but the quiet, sustainable happiness of a person who has found work that matters, a home that is sufficient, and a place in a community that values her. She was happy and she did not expect her happiness to change, because change, in Sophia's experience, was rarely an improvement. She was wrong about that, but she would not discover how wrong until the night of the storm. If you're new here, welcome to Jane Tells Stories, where the untold love stories of the Regency era come alive. If you love stories about women with extraordinary gifts and the men who learned to see them, subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss a story. Now let's continue. One stormy night, the Lord's carriage crashed near her home. The storm arrived in late October of 1821, with the sudden, theatrical violence that autumn storms bring to the English countryside, the sky turning black in the space of an hour, the wind rising from nothing to fury, the rain arriving not as drops, but as sheets, as walls, as a solid mass of water that hammered the roof of Sophia's cottage with the sound of 1,000 fists. Sophia was inside. She was preparing for bed, banking the fire, checking the shutters, performing the small rituals of security that a woman living alone in a cottage on the edge of an estate performs every night, not from fear, but from habit. The storm was fierce, but Sophia was not afraid of storms. She had been born in this cottage during a storm. Her mother had told her the story many times, how the thunder had shaken the walls and the rain had leaked through the roof, and the midwife had said, "This child comes with weather," and Sophia had always taken it as a compliment. She heard the crash. It was a sound that cut through the storm, a splintering, cracking, unmistakable sound that was not thunder and was not a falling tree. It was the sound of something manufactured breaking, something with wheels and axles, and the particular physics of a heavy object moving at speed and encountering an obstacle it cannot overcome. She ran out and found him bleeding and unconscious. She grabbed her cloak and her medical bag, the leather case that Mrs. Blackwell had given her, packed with the essentials: clean cloths, splints, a bottle of laudanum for pain, a tin of salve for wounds, a flask of brandy for shock. She ran out into the storm, into the darkness and the rain, and she followed the sound, the screaming of horses, the shouts of a coachman, the sharp, particular noise of distress that tells you, even in the dark, exactly where the disaster is. The carriage was on its side. It was a grand carriage, lacquered black, with a crest on the door that Sophia could not read in the darkness, pulled by a team of 4 horses, 2 of which were down and tangled in the harness. The coachman was pinned beneath the overturned driver's box, conscious but trapped, shouting for help with the desperate energy of a man who understands that his legs are under something heavy and that the something is not going to move on its own. Sophia dealt with the coachman first. She assessed the injury. His legs were trapped but not crushed, the weight of the box distributed across a broken wheel that had created a pocket of space beneath. She talked to him, calm, steady, the voice she used with patience, the voice that said, "I am here. I am competent. I will help you." And she leveraged the broken wheel with a piece of timber from the fence, lifting the box just enough for the coachman to pull himself free. His legs were bruised, but intact. She left him sitting against the fence with the brandy flask and went to find the passenger. Lord William Harrington was inside the overturned carriage. He was lying on the ceiling, which was now the floor, the carriage being on its side, and he was bleeding from a wound on his forehead where his head had struck the window frame. He was unconscious. His breathing was steady, but shallow. His face, in the dim light of the carriage's interior lamp, which had, miraculously, not gone out, was pale, angular, and younger than she had expected. Sophia had never met Lord Harrington. She had lived on his estate for 20 years, but the lord and the tenant healer occupied different levels of the same world, and the levels did not mix. She knew him by reputation. The young lord who had inherited the estate from his father 2 years ago, who spent most of his time in London, who appeared in the county only for the shooting season and the occasional estate business. The tenants spoke of him neutrally. He was not loved, because he was not present enough to be loved, but he was not hated either, because the estate was managed fairly and the rents were reasonable. She did not think about any of this while she was pulling him from the carriage. She thought about the wound, a laceration, deep but clean, that would need stitching. She thought about the possibility of a concussion. The pupils would need to be checked when he regained consciousness. She thought about the rain, which was still hammering down, and the distance to her cottage, which was 200 yards away, and the logistics of moving an unconscious man through a storm with only a bruised coachman to help. They managed it. The coachman, whose name was Jenkins, was a large, loyal, deeply practical man who picked up his employer the way one might pick up a child, carefully, firmly, without ceremony, and carried him through the rain to Sophia's cottage, where Sophia had a bed and a fire and the equipment to treat the wound. She laid Lord Harrington on her bed. She cleaned the wound. She stitched it. 7 neat, precise stitches, executed with the steady hand and the focused attention that had become her signature. She checked his pupils. She checked his breathing. She wrapped his head in clean bandages and covered him with blankets and sat in the chair beside the bed and watched him breathe and waited for him to wake. He woke at dawn. The storm had passed, and the light that came through Sophia's small window was the pale, washed-clean light that follows heavy rain. Everything sharp and new, as if the world had been rinsed. He opened his eyes, and the eyes were grey, clear, intelligent, confused in the particular way that a person is confused when they wake in a place they do not recognize. "Where am I?" he asked. "My cottage, on the edge of your estate. Your carriage overturned in the storm. You have a laceration on your forehead and a possible concussion. You should not move for at least a day." He looked at her. He looked at her the way people look at the person who has just saved their life, with a mixture of gratitude and disorientation that is almost comical, because the lifesaver is rarely the person you expected. And Sophia, small, dark-haired, dressed in a plain cotton dress with herb stains on the apron, was very much not the person Lord Harrington had expected to find standing over his bed. "You're the healer," he said, "the one the tenants talk about. I'm Sophia, Lord Harrington. I know who you are. Your crest is on the carriage door." He almost smiled. Almost. The wound prevented a full smile, the stitches pulling at the skin. But the corners of his mouth lifted, and Sophia saw it, and she filed it away in the place where she filed everything she observed, which was the same place where she filed the information from her gift. His hands. She had noticed them immediately. Even while he was unconscious, she had noticed his hands. The shape of them, the tension in them, the way they rested on the blanket. Unconscious hands are honest hands, because the conscious mind, the mind that controls and manages and performs, is absent, and what remains is the body's truth. Lord Harrington's unconscious hands had been clenched, not into fists, nothing so dramatic, but tight. The fingers curled inward, the tendons visible beneath the skin, the posture of hands that had been holding on to something, or holding something back, for a very long time. Now that he was awake, she watched them change. The grip loosened. The fingers relaxed. The hands opened slightly, as if the act of waking in a strange place, a clean, warm, herb-scented cottage attended by a calm, competent woman, had given them permission to release whatever they had been holding. Sophia saw this. She did not mention it. The gift was her secret, and secrets are kept by not speaking them. While nursing him back to health, she noticed something strange. His hands never lied. The recovery took 2 weeks. The wound healed well. Sophia's stitching was clean and her salves were effective. But the concussion lingered, producing headaches and dizziness that made travel inadvisable. And Sophia, who took her responsibilities as a healer seriously, refused to release her patient until she was certain the symptoms had fully resolved. Lord Harrington protested. He protested in the manner of a man accustomed to having his schedule respected and his wishes fulfilled, politely but firmly, with the assumption that his desire to leave would override the medical judgment of a woman who lived in a cottage and earned her living in eggs and firewood. Sophia was not overridden. "You may leave when your pupils respond equally to light, and your balance is steady enough to walk a straight line," she told him, with the calm authority of a woman who had been treating patients for 8 years and who had learned, through experience, that the most important word in a healer's vocabulary is no. He stayed, and in staying, he entered Sophia's world, the small, quiet, carefully ordered world of the cottage, where time moved at the pace of a kettle boiling and a fire burning, and the slow, patient work of healing. They talked. At first the talking was stilted, the awkward, formal conversation of two people who occupied different levels of the same world, and who had no shared language for bridging the gap. He asked about her remedies. She explained them: the willow bark for pain, the comfrey for healing, the chamomile for sleep. He asked about her life. She told him, briefly, without embellishment, the facts of a life that was small and satisfying and entirely unlike anything he had experienced. He told her about London, about the season, the balls and the dinners, and the endless rotation of social obligations that constituted life for a young lord with a title and a fortune, and no particular purpose. He told her about the estate, which he managed at a distance through a steward, and the management, he admitted, was not something he took pride in because it was not something he had chosen. The estate had chosen him, or rather, his father's death had chosen him, transferring the responsibility onto his shoulders before he was ready, before he had finished at university, before he had decided what kind of man he wanted to be. He told her about his fiancée, Lady Helena Beaumont, the daughter of the Marquis of Thornbury, a woman he had been courting in London for 2 seasons, and to whom he was now engaged. The engagement had been announced in the Times. The wedding was planned for December. The arrangements were being managed by Lady Helena's mother, a woman of formidable organisational ability and equally formidable social ambition. Every time he spoke of his cruel fiancé in London, his fingers tightened with disgust. Sophia watched. She watched with the particular attention that was her gift and her burden, and what she saw in Lord Harrington's hands when he spoke of Lady Helena was unmistakable. Not love, not tenderness, not even the resigned acceptance that many arranged marriages produced. Disgust. The fingers curling inward, the knuckles whitening, the thumbs pressing hard against the forefingers, a gesture Sophia had seen hundreds of times, in hundreds of people, and it always meant the same thing, the body rejecting what the mouth was saying. His mouth said pleasant things about Lady Helena. His mouth described her beauty, her accomplishments, her family connections. His mouth performed the role that was expected of it. The grateful fiancé, the man who understood his duty and accepted it with the good grace that his class demanded. His hands said something else. His hands said, "I do not want this. His hands said, "This woman frightens me." His hands said, "I am trapped." Sophia saw this, and she did not say anything, because the gift was her secret. But she felt something shift, a sympathy, a recognition, a connection that went beyond the healer-patient relationship that had been the framework of their interactions. She saw a man who was lying with his mouth and telling the truth with his hands, and the duality, the gap between the performed self and the real self, was something Sophia understood intimately because she had been living in the same gap for her entire life. She watched him more closely after that. She watched his hands when he talked about his mother, gentle, open, the fingers relaxed, the palms upward. The hands of a man who associated this person with safety. She watched when he talked about his father, tighter, more controlled, the hands of a man who had loved but also feared. She watched when he talked about the estate, active, engaged, the hands moving with purpose, the gestures of a man who cared about the thing he was describing, even if he had not chosen it. And she watched when he talked about himself, when he spoke about his own life, his own future, his own plans. His hands did something that Sophia had rarely seen before. They went still, completely, utterly, unnervingly still. The hands of a man who had no plans, who had no future, not one he had chosen, who was moving through his life on rails that someone else had laid, heading toward a destination someone else had selected, and whose body, whose honest, ungovernable body, had simply stopped participating. The stillness frightened Sophia. Stillness in a patient's hands usually meant resignation, and resignation was the most dangerous condition she treated, because it did not present as illness. It presented as composure. It looked, to everyone except Sophia, like a man who was at peace with his circumstances. But the hands knew better. The hands knew that the peace was not peace at all. It was surrender, and surrender, if left untreated, became despair. She could not treat his hands. She could not point at them and say, "Your fingers tightened when you spoke of Lady Helena, which means you are disgusted by her, and your hands go still when you speak of your own future, which means you have given up." She could not do this because the gift was her secret. And also because diagnosing a lord's emotional life was not within the scope of a village healer's responsibilities. But she could treat him in other ways. She could cook for him. Simple food, the food of her world, soups and bread, and the herb teas that she brewed with the same care she brought to her remedies. She could listen to him. Not with the polished, performative listening of London drawing rooms, where listening was a strategy and a transaction, but with the genuine, full-bodied listening of a woman who had spent her life paying attention and who found Lord Harrington, despite everything, interesting. She could be honest with him. This was the treatment she prescribed without naming it. Honesty. The radical, uncomfortable, socially inappropriate honesty of a woman who did not know how to lie and did not want to learn. He asked her one evening whether she thought he should marry Lady Helena. "That is not my concern," Sophia said. "I am asking for your opinion." "You don't want my opinion. You want me to confirm the decision you have already made so that you can feel better about it." He stared at her. Nobody had ever spoken to him like that. In London, people told him what he wanted to hear. In the countryside, people told him what they thought he expected to hear. No one in his entire 30 years of life, had looked at him and said, "You want me to confirm the decision you have already made," with the flat, unadorned precision of a woman stating a fact. "What decision have I made?" he asked. "To go through with it. To marry a woman you don't love because the arrangement suits your position and your family's expectations. You've decided." And you want someone, me, apparently, to tell you that it's the right decision so that you can stop feeling the thing you're feeling. What am I feeling? Sophia looked at his hands. They were clenched again, tight, white, the tendons visible. She looked away. Trapped, she said. The word landed in the small cottage like a stone in a still pool. Lord Harrington sat in the chair by the fire and looked at this woman, this village healer, this tenant on his estate, this small, dark-haired person with herb stains on her apron and an impossible gift for seeing the truth. And he felt, for the first time in months, a loosening, a release. The word she had spoken, trapped, was the word he had been carrying without naming, and the naming of it, the simple act of having another person identify the thing he was feeling and speak it aloud, was a relief so profound that it registered in his body as a physical sensation. His shoulders dropped, his jaw unclenched, his hands, those honest, ungovernable hands, opened. Sophia saw them open. She saw it, and she felt a warmth that she recognized, with alarm, as the beginning of something she could not afford. Because Sophia, who could read every lie in every pair of hands she encountered, had just watched a man's hands tell the truth. And the truth was beautiful. And beauty, in Sophia's experience, was always attached to a cost. As he recovered, Lord Harrington fell deeply in love with Sophia's quiet kindness. It happened the way falling happens, gradually, and then all at once, the slow accumulation of small moments that individually seem insignificant, but collectively build a structure so large and so solid that by the time you notice it, it is already supporting your weight. He fell in love with the way she moved through her cottage, quietly, efficiently, with the particular grace of a person who has arranged their environment to serve their work, and who moves through it the way a musician moves through a piece they have memorized. He fell in love with the way she made tea, not the formal, ritualized tea service of London, with its silver pots and china cups and the elaborate choreography of pouring and passing, but the simple, direct act of boiling water and adding herbs and handing him a cup with both hands, the gesture warm and unperformative and real. He fell in love with her honesty. This was the thing that undid him, the thing that distinguished Sophia from every other person in his life. She did not flatter. She did not hedge. She did not wrap her opinions in the soft cushioning of social nicety. She told him the truth, always, about everything, about his wound, about his recovery, about his engagement, about himself. And the truth, which should have been uncomfortable, was instead the most comforting thing he had ever received, because it meant that everything else she said was also true, and a man who has been lied to his entire life values truthfulness, the way a man dying of thirst values water. He fell in love with her hands. This was ironic, given her gift. She who read the truth in other people's hands became, for him, the truth itself. He watched her hands the way she watched his, the way they moved when she mixed her remedies, the steady, practiced, confident movements of a person doing the thing they were born to do. He watched them when she stitched a wound, the precision, the delicacy, the absolute control. He watched them when she rested, placed flat on the table, open, palms up, the hands of a woman who had nothing to hide. He loved her. He loved her with the sudden, total, structural certainty of a man who has been sleepwalking and has been woken by a sound, a voice, a laugh, the particular way a woman says trapped with a kindness that makes the word bearable, and who understands, in the moment of waking, that everything before this moment was sleep. Sophia knew. She could not help knowing. His hands told her everything. and his hands, in her presence, were loud. They reached for her without his conscious knowledge, reaching across the table when they talked, reaching toward her when she passed, the unconscious, gravitational reaching of a body that has found its center and cannot help moving toward it. She saw the reaching, and she understood what it meant, and the understanding produced in her a feeling that was equal parts joy and terror. Joy, because she was falling too. Falling for this man who was not what she had expected. Not the distant, disengaged lord of reputation, but a thoughtful, wounded, quietly desperate man who had been given a life he did not want and was discovering, in a cottage on the edge of his own estate, that another life was possible. Terror, because the other life was not possible. Not for her, not for him. The distance between a lord and a healer was not measured in miles. It was measured in centuries, in the accumulated weight of a social system that had been designed, with extraordinary precision, to prevent exactly this kind of connection. A lord who loved a village healer was an anomaly. An anomaly could be tolerated briefly as an eccentricity, but an anomaly that persisted, that turned into a marriage, a household, a life, would be crushed by the system with the same mechanical efficiency that the system brought to everything it disapproved of. She knew this. She had seen it in the hands of the tenants she treated, the farm wife who loved the squire's son and was destroyed by it, the gardener who loved the lady of the house and was dismissed for it. The hands told the story that the mouth could not, the story of loves that exceeded the boundaries that society had drawn, and the story always ended the same way, with broken hands, with clenched fingers, with the particular stillness that Sophia recognized as resignation. She would not end that way. She could not. But when he asked her to marry him, she refused, saying a lord could never wed a common healer. He asked on the 14th day, the day she had planned to discharge him, the day his pupils were finally responding equally, and his balance was steady enough to walk a straight line. He asked in the kitchen, while she was packing his wound dressing for the journey home, and the asking was not a grand gesture. It was not the kneeling with a ring performance of London proposals. It was quiet. It was honest. It was the voice of a man who had been watching a woman for 2 weeks, and who had understood, with the slow, certain comprehension that genuine love produces, that this was the person he wanted to spend his life with. "Marry me," he said. Sophia's hands, which she had been using to fold a bandage, stopped. They went still. Completely, utterly, unnervingly still. And she recognized the stillness because it was the same stillness she had seen in his hands when he talked about his own future, and it meant the same thing. The body refusing to participate in what the mind was contemplating. "No," she said. "Why?" "Because a lord could never wed a common healer. Because the world you live in would destroy us both. Because I have spent my life watching people's hands, and I know, Lord Harrington, what happens to love that crosses the lines your world has drawn. It is crushed. Every time. Without exception. You read hands." She had not meant to say it. The words had escaped, slipped out in the urgency of the refusal, the way a secret slips out when the pressure behind it becomes too great. She closed her eyes. She had kept the gift hidden for 20 years, and in a single sentence of refusal, she had given it away. "I watch hands," she said, more carefully. "I notice things. The way people move their fingers when they're lying. The way they clench when they're afraid. The way they reach for things they want and pull back from things they don't. Your hands, Lord Harrington, have been telling me things for 2 weeks that your mouth has not." He looked at his hands. He looked at them, as if seeing them for the first time. These instruments he had carried his entire life without noticing, these honest, ungovernable appendages that had been betraying him to a village healer while he slept and ate and talked and fell in love. "What have they told you?" he asked. "That you are disgusted by your fiancé, that you love your mother, that you are afraid of your father's legacy, that you care about this estate more than you let yourself admit, and that you love me, which I already knew, because a man whose hands reach for a woman every time she passes is not a man who is uncertain about his feelings." The silence that followed was the silence of a man who has been completely seen, not partially, not superficially, not in the curated, edited way that people usually see each other, but completely. Every hidden thing brought into the light, every secret spoken, every lie exposed by the woman who could read the truth in his fingers. "Then you know I'm telling the truth," he said. "My hands are not lying now." She looked at his hands. They were open, palms up, fingers relaxed. The hands of a man who was not performing, not controlling, not managing. The hands of a man who was simply, entirely, honestly himself. "I know," she said, "but that doesn't change the answer. Some truths are not enough to overcome the world." He left the next morning. He rode back to the main house in a carriage that Jenkins had brought from the estate, and Sophia stood in the doorway of her cottage and watched him go, and his hands, visible through the carriage window, resting on his knees, were clenched. The weeks that followed were a particular kind of agony for both of them. The agony of people who have found each other and have been separated not by distance or circumstance, but by a system so large and so old that fighting it felt like fighting the weather. Lord Harrington returned to London. He resumed his life, the balls, the dinners, the social obligations. He sat across from Lady Helena at dining tables and listened to her talk about redecorating the townhouse and selecting china patterns and the guest list for the wedding. And he smiled and nodded and participated, and his hands, his honest, ungovernable, traitorous hands, tightened and clenched and curled inward with such consistency that Lady Helena, who was not observant in the way Sophia was observant, but who was not blind, asked him one evening whether something was wrong. "Nothing is wrong," he said, and his right thumb pressed hard against his forefinger, and anyone who could read the language of hands would have known he was lying. Lady Helena was not a good woman. This was not a matter of opinion. It was a matter of observation, the kind of observation that servants made and shared, and that Sophia, had she been present, would have confirmed with a single glance at Lady Helena's hands. Lady Helena was calculating, manipulative, and possessed of a particular cruelty that expressed itself not through violence, but through control. She controlled her servants with fear. She controlled her friends with gossip. She controlled her fiancé with the implicit threat that any deviation from her plans would result in social consequences that would make his life unbearable. She was, in short, the opposite of Sophia. Where Sophia was honest, Helena was strategic. Where Sophia was kind, Helena was effective. Where Sophia's hands were open and still, Helena's were always moving, adjusting, rearranging, reaching for things and people, and positioning them according to a design that only she could see. Lord Harrington endured. He endured the wedding preparations and the social season, and the particular torture of sitting in London, drawing rooms surrounded by people who told him what he wanted to hear, when the thing he wanted to hear, the only thing, the true thing, was the voice of a woman in a cottage in the countryside who had told him no and meant it, and whose hands, when she said it, had been shaking. because Sophia's hands had been shaking. Lord Harrington was not gifted in the way Sophia was. He could not read the full emotional landscape of a person's inner life by watching their fingers. But he had been paying attention for 2 weeks in a cottage where there was nothing to do but pay attention, and he had noticed what Sophia's hands did when she refused him. They shook. They shook the way a person's hands shake when they are doing something that contradicts every impulse in their body, when the will is moving in one direction and the heart is pulling in the other, and the conflict between them produces a tremor that cannot be suppressed. She had refused him, but her hands had said yes, and Lord Harrington, who had spent his entire life in a world where people's mouths and their truths were rarely aligned, held on to this contradiction like a drowning man holds onto a rope. Back in Ashbourne, Sophia worked. She treated her patients. She mixed her remedies. She sat in her cottage in the evenings and did not think about Lord Harrington, except that she thought about him constantly, which was a kind of not thinking that only people in love can achieve. The deliberate, sustained, exhausting effort to not think about the thing you are always thinking about. She thought about his hands. She thought about the way they had opened when she told him the truth, the palms upward, the fingers relaxed, the gesture of a man who was not hiding. She thought about the reaching, the unconscious, gravitational pulling toward her that his hands had been doing for 2 weeks. She thought about the stillness that had frightened her, the stillness of a man who had no future he had chosen. And she thought about the way the stillness had broken when he asked her to marry him, the way his hands had come alive, animated by a purpose that was, for the first time, his own. She had refused him because the world would crush them. She believed this. She had seen the evidence in 100 pairs of hands. The crushed loves, the broken connections, the resignations that followed when people tried to cross the lines that society had drawn. But she had also seen his hands open. And open hands, in Sophia's experience, were the hands of a person telling the truth. And the truth, which she had spent her life devoted to, was now telling her something she did not want to hear, that he loved her, that the love was real, that her refusal, which had been an act of protection, protecting them both from the crushing weight of the world, had also been an act of cowardice. She had refused not because the world would crush them, but because she was afraid of what would happen if it didn't. Afraid of the hope. Afraid of the possibility that the lines could be crossed, that the system could be defied, that 2 people from different worlds could build something that the world could not destroy. She was afraid of being wrong. And the fear of being wrong was, she realized, a form of the same resignation she had diagnosed in Lord Harrington's still hands. She was surrendering. She was giving up before the battle began. She was doing, with her refusal, exactly what she had accused him of doing with his engagement, going through with something she did not want because the alternative was too frightening to contemplate. The wedding was in December. November passed. The days grew short. The nights grew cold. Sophia treated her patients and mixed her remedies and sat in her cottage and watched her own hands, and her hands, her honest, gifted, traitorous hands, trembled every time she thought of him. On the day of his wedding to the London lady, Harrington left his bride at the altar, rode through the rain to Sophia's cottage, and told her, "My hands have never lied to you. They are telling you the truth right now. I love you." The wedding was held at St. George's, Hanover Square, the church where the aristocracy married, where the vows were spoken beneath a ceiling painted with angels and the pews were filled with the most powerful people in England. Lady Helena wore a gown that had taken 6 seamstresses 4 months to construct. White silk, Brussels lace, seed pearls, the physical manifestation of a family's wealth and ambition. The guests wore their finest. The bishop wore his vestments. The organ played. Everything was perfect. Lord Harrington stood at the altar and watched Lady Helena walk toward him, and his hands, which were folded in front of his body in the correct posture of a groom awaiting his bride, were shaking, not trembling, not the slight, suppressed vibration that nervousness produces, shaking, visibly, unmistakably, violently shaking, the hands of a man whose body was in full revolt against what his mind had agreed to do. The best man noticed. The bishop noticed. Lady Helena, who was halfway down the aisle, and who was not observant but was not blind, noticed, and her eyes, cool, calculating, already planning the adjustments she would make to this man once the ring was on his finger, narrowed. Lord Harrington looked at his hands. He looked at them the way Sophia had taught him to look, not at the surface, but at the meaning. The shaking was not nervousness. It was rejection. His body, his honest, ungovernable body, was saying no. It was saying no with every tremor, every quake, every violent shudder that ran through his fingers and up his arms and into the core of him. He thought of Sophia. He thought of her hands. The steady, calm, open hands of a woman who did not know how to lie. He thought of the way she had refused him, and the way her hands had shaken when she did, and the way the shaking had told him what her mouth would not. He looked at Lady Helena. He looked at the bishop. He looked at the 300 guests in their finest clothes, and the 6 seamstresses' work in white silk, and the painted angels on the ceiling who were looking down with expressions that might have been benevolence or might have been pity. He turned. He walked down the aisle. He walked past the gasping guests and the furious mother-in-law and the bewildered bishop, and he walked through the doors of the church and into the December rain, and he found his horse, saddled and waiting, because Jenkins, who was loyal and observant, and who had spent 2 weeks in a cottage watching his employer fall in love, had suspected this might happen, and he mounted and he rode. He rode through the rain. He rode through London and into the countryside, through the bare fields and the skeleton trees and the grey December landscape that looked, in the rain, like a painting that had been left out in the weather. He rode for 3 hours, and the rain soaked him, and the cold numbed him, and none of it mattered, because he was riding toward the only thing that did. He arrived at the cottage at dusk. The light was on, the warm yellow light of a single candle in the window, the light that Sophia always kept burning because her patients sometimes came at night and needed to find her. He dismounted. He stood in the rain outside the door of the tiny cottage on the edge of his own estate. He was soaked. He was shaking, not from the cold, but from the magnitude of what he had done and what he was about to do. He raised his hand. He knocked. Sophia opened the door. She looked at him. This drenched, shaking, rain-soaked man, standing on her doorstep in his wedding clothes, with the boutonniere still pinned to his lapel, and the ring still in his pocket, and the entire weight of the English social system collapsing behind him like a building brought down by a single removed brick. She looked at his hands. They were at his sides. They were open, palms facing her, fingers spread. The gesture of a man who was hiding nothing. The gesture of a man who had come to her with everything he had, which was, stripped of the title and the fortune and the estate and the expectations, simply himself, and was offering it without condition. "My hands have never lied to you," he said. "They are telling you the truth right now. I love you." Sophia looked at his hands. She read them the way she had read every pair of hands she had ever encountered, with the full, focused, extraordinary attention that was her gift and her burden, and in this moment, her salvation. His hands were telling the truth. The love was real. It was not performance, not strategy, not the temporary infatuation that would fade once the excitement of transgression wore off. It was real. It was structural. It was the kind of love that reorganizes a person from the inside out, that changes the architecture of the self, that takes a man who was sleepwalking and wakes him up and says, "This is your life now." Sophia finally took his hand, read the honest love in his fingers, and said yes. She took his hand. She held it. She felt the truth in his fingers, the warmth, the steadiness, the absolute, ungovernable honesty of a body that had never learned to lie. And she said the word she had been afraid to say for weeks, the word her own hands had been saying while her mouth refused. Yes. The Lord abandoned his grand title and fortune to live simply with the woman who saw his true heart. He did. He gave up the London house. He gave up the social season. He gave up the world that had been prescribed for him since birth, the world of titles and obligations and marriages of convenience and the careful, performative, dishonest life that his class demanded. He did not give up the estate. This was Sophia's condition, not that he keep it for himself, but that he keep it for the tenants, the families who farmed the Harrington land, who depended on it for their livelihoods, who would suffer if the estate passed to a distant cousin with no interest in their welfare. Sophia, who had been a tenant her entire life, understood what the estate meant to the people who lived on it, and she would not permit her love to become their loss. So Lord Harrington kept the estate. He managed it, not from London, not through a steward, but directly, personally, with his own hands. The hands that had tightened with disgust when he spoke of Lady Helena, the hands that had opened when he spoke to Sophia, the hands that now held a plough handle and a pen, and the hand of the woman he loved. And that told the truth in all three cases. They married in the village church. The vicar performed the ceremony, the same vicar whose hands Sophia had read when she was 7. The man whose fingers had tightened on the pulpit and whose right hand had trembled. He was old now, and his hands were steadier, and when he spoke, the vows his voice did not shake, because the marriage he was blessing was, he could see, the truest thing he had ever witnessed. Sophia wore a simple dress. She wore herbs in her hair, rosemary for remembrance, lavender for devotion, thyme for courage. She held Lord Harrington's hands throughout the ceremony, and her gift, the gift she had kept secret for 20 years, was, for once, not a burden. It was a joy, because the hands she was holding were telling her, with every heartbeat, that this was right, that this was true, that this was the thing she had been waiting for without knowing she was waiting. They lived in the cottage. Not because they had to. The main house was available, and Lord Harrington could have installed Sophia there as the lady of the estate. But the cottage was Sophia's, and Sophia wanted to stay. She wanted the herb garden and the small rooms and the fire that she banked every night. She wanted the patients who came to her door and the payment in eggs and bread. She wanted the life she had built, the small, quiet, sufficient life. And she wanted Lord Harrington in it. Not as a lord, as a man, as the man whose hands had told her the truth. He was happy. He was happy in a way that he had never imagined possible. The particular happiness of a man who has stopped performing and started living, who has traded a grand life for a true one, and discovered that the trade was not a sacrifice, but a rescue. His hands, in the cottage, were always open, always reaching, always honest. And Sophia, who could read every lie in every pair of hands she had ever seen, never found a lie in his. Not once. Not ever. The gift that had been her burden became her confirmation. Every day, in every gesture, in every unconscious movement of his fingers, she read the same truth. He loved her. He loved her with his mouth and his mind and his body and his hands. And the hands, the honest, ungovernable, beautiful hands, never contradicted the rest. Some people are read by their faces, some by their words, some by the actions they take in the light of day, where everyone can see. But the truest reading, the one that cannot be faked, cannot be rehearsed, cannot be controlled, is the reading of hands, the fingers that tighten when a lie is being told, the palms that open when the truth arrives, the reach that says, "I want you." Involuntary and undeniable, the body's oldest language, spoken without permission, heard only by those who know how to listen. Sophia knew how to listen. She had been listening her whole life, and the hands of the man she loved told her every day the only story that mattered, the true one. If this story stayed with you, subscribe to Jane Tells Stories and hit the bell. A new, untold Regency love story arrives every week. Tell me in the comments, do you believe our hands tell the truth when our mouths cannot? And have you ever watched someone's hands and known, really known, what they were feeling? Until next time, this has been Jane Tells Stories.